Hello everybody, my name is Pentameld, and if you've recently watched my 7.3 prep video, you may have walked away wondering, how is it that I actually go about making these lists and have an idea of what we are going to be needing for each of these patch cycles? I'm going to go ahead and delve into how I do my research and get an idea of what it is that we are going to need for each patch cycle, because everything in Final Fantasy XIV is relatively repeated over and over for the patch cycles. Now, there are ups and downs into that, and I'm not really going to get into that specifically, but I am going to show you what I use to make the predictions and get an idea of what we're going to need for each patch. So first off, what I do is always look back at the historical patch that is equivalent to the one we're getting right now. So what I mean by that is 7.3, we can look back on 6.3 to have an idea of what we're going to be needing. Let's go ahead and pull that up. Now, you do need to have a little bit of an idea of what each of the gear sets is, but with 6.3, we got the Indagator's gear, which was all of the left side and the right side, and then we also got Indagator's tools out of that, which was for every single offhand and main hand on both crafters and gatherers. Now, if we do take a look at what these needed to be able to craft them, we can pull up this list here, and this is where I got most of my information about what we're going to need for the patch. So first off, it has a Craftsman Alkahest. If we open up that page here, we can see that it uses a Mournveil tree bark, an immutable solution, and an Earthbreak Aether Sand. This came out in 6.3 for this particular recipe, so this was a new item that released for this gear. If we take a look at the Mournveil tree bark, for example, you can see that this is a 6.3 patch release, and it was a legendary botanist node that was only used for the Craftsman Alkahest. This is why I know that we're going to get two new legendary items, one for botanist and one for miner, and I'll show you the miner one in a minute here. So then if we go back, we can see that the next item that we need is the immutable solution, which is a patch 6.1 release that was for scripts. Now, this was for purple scripts at the time, which were the high tier scripts for Endwalker, and it cost 125 back then. And we know now that 6.1 already had its release of its item, which was the condensed solution. And this one came out in 7.1 as well for 125 orange scripts. So we now know that the immutable solution is essentially the same as the condensed solution that we have right now. So we're going to need that item. And then finally, this required the Earthbreak Aether Sands, which you can see also came out in patch 6.3. It had 4 ethereal reductions, 1 for miner, 2 for fisher, and 1 for botanist. And this is the only Aether Sand that were released in 6.3, and it was used for the Craftsman Alkahest. If we go back to our Indagator's piece, we can take a look at the Bayberry Cloth as our next item and the Elmanite Ingot. Both of these items were released in 6.2, and if you scroll down towards the bottom, you can see that they were originally used for the combat gear that came out in 6.2. We can scroll up to see that they were later used for the Indagator's gear as well, and we can take a look at what we needed in order to craft the Bayberry Cloth, for example, and that used Bayberry, which was a 6.2 legendary gatherable node, and the Pale Bloom Kudzu Cloth, which was a tombstone node. Now, this does not reflect the price at the time of the release. They were 20 of the level 100 tomes, the non-capped tomes at the time, but this also came out in 6.2. So now that we know that, we can assume that the 7.2 items that we used for the combat gear in 7.2 are going to be the same items that we're going to need for the 6.3 crafting and gathering gear. So that knocks out the Bayberry Cloth and the Elmanite Ingot because it's the same exact thing. It is 1 legendary node and 1 tombstone item. Next up, we can look at Grip Gel. Now, this is the one that I did make a little bit of a mistake on at first, but I did fix it in my video before I published it. But this is a new script item that came out in 6.3. Now, this lists it at 250 purple scripts, and I got a little confused on how the pricing was because I didn't remember exactly. And one of my Discord members actually pointed out to me that they thought it was white scripts back in Endwalker, which were not the level 100 cap script. So what I ended up having to do was dig around in Google, and I did find this article from back during Endwalker that said that the price of grip gels was 500 white crafter scripts. So that is what I used to reference back that these new items that we're going to get in 7.3 are going to be 500 purple scripts. So that breaks down essentially everything you need to know for Indigators in terms of what is going to be used for it. It's actually pretty simple to figure out, but you do have to dig around to understand everything there. I did do a little bit more research into the foods and the Aether Sands. That was just essentially digging around to see what exactly came out in 6.3 that we can look back towards now. Now, another question I was getting asked a lot was how much materia am I going to need in order to pentameld this new gear? And that's where I'm going to pull up the Teamcraft app, where you can actually take a look at the 6.3 recommended set for Indigators that I had saved from back then. Now, this gear set has all pentameld for all tools and gear, so it gives you an idea of how much materia you're actually going to need. Now, what I do with this is I do include all tools for other jobs, and I put my melding confidence rate at 0.8. This means that 80% chance of pentamelding with all of this materia will succeed. It's essentially just a threshold where you can adjust how lucky you're going to get. I have an 80% chance that on rate, I should be able to get this. I'm assuming that there's a 20% chance that I don't have enough materia, but this is the number I'm comfortable with because when you bump this up to 100%, you're going to double the amount of materia that you're going to need. So now we can scroll down and take a look at what materials were needed for this setup back in 6.3. Now, the materia is not going to be exactly the same. The gear pieces that they release will be different stats and different max stats that you can put materia into, so there is going to be some variation, but we can at least use this as a basis of understanding how much materia we're going to need. So I did put together a list on my spreadsheet that you can find in my 7.3 prep video, and I'll also link it down in the comments here. But it does break down essentially what you're going to need on materia based on these rough estimates. Now, I made some slight modifications because, as you can see, like control 12s, which are equivalent to control 10s, they only used 100 in 6.3, but I do have the 7.2 high tier meld set here where we do use about 250 controls. So I went ahead and bumped this number to 250, not the 100 that we used in 6.3, because I do think the gear is going to show a trend in the similar stats to the 7.1 gear rather than the 6.3 gear. So I kind of used this as more of a basis for a lot of my numbers, but I did use this as a little bit of a comparison to kind of make an educated guess on how much materia we're going to need. Now, all of these numbers are going to be based on your luck, if you're going to full pentameld, and even they could be wrong. Some of the gear could just change dramatically, especially in the stats, because that is where we see a decent amount of the mix up from patch to patch. Now, one thing I do want to note is that materia for CP in particular, we actually used 0 level 12 CP melds in our 7.2 gear and did use a ton of lower level CP. Now, one thing you have to understand here, level 9s are what I'm going to recommend you get because there are some good ways to get them, such as like Island Sanctuary. So these to me are some of the easier materia to get. You don't necessarily have to use level 9s, but even in these kind of setups where you can see this calls that you need level 4 CP materia. Now, if you look down to one of the boots here, it has that level 4 CP materia for that +4. You do not have to use a level 4. You can use a level 9 materia if you want, and it will give you that +8 CP technically, but what it'll do is it'll turn red. Instead of giving that +8 CP that it should, it will limit it to a +4 CP. And let me actually show you in game what I mean by that. So you can see on my boots here, the very last meld, I used a level 11 CP materia to get that +3 that is available, but it should have given me +9. The gear could not fit that +9 CP though, so it just cuts off that 6 and makes it so that you can't actually have that full +9, but there's no downside to using like a level 11 or a level 9 or anything that has more than 3 CP. And that's because if you look at how the materia works, at the bottom, it shows you how many stats you can actually get of any of the things that you can meld into. So for this Everseeker file, I can only fit 8 CP, which is what I put in there. If I were to try to meld more CP, it will tell me you're gonna get +0 because I can't actually get more than the 8 that is the maximum. So you can use any materia that technically gives you more, because even here I'm using a level 10 CP materia, which I believe gives 10 CP if I'm remembering right. It might be 11, I don't remember exactly, but the game just caps it at 8 because that's what the gear can fit. Now, another thing I do want to touch on is how many items are you going to need for the gear to be able to craft a single set? So I put together this list, which is all of the Indigators, crafting gear, and tools, which is 26 items total. And you can see on this list how many of each of the individual items you're going to need to craft this whole set. Using this, we can judge that we'll probably need 75 condensed solutions, which is the equivalent of the immutable solutions from 6.3, in order to craft a full crafted set with tools. And we'll also need 75 of the new purple script item that's going to come out in 7.3. And then you can look down to see these are the tombstone items that we are currently able to craft. You can get a decent idea of how many you're going to need to be able to craft the new gear. Now, these numbers may vary slightly, but at least gives you a baseline understanding of how many items you should aim for if you're trying to be prepared. And again, this is just the crafter gear with the tools, and I'll link this list down in the description, and I'll also make one for just the gatherer tools and gatherer gear if you want to use it as a baseline for how many items you're going to need to get. Now, I hope all of that made sense. This was kind of just a ramble into how I am preparing all of this information and providing it to you guys, because I had some people ask, and I'm all about just sharing the information. I don't want to try to gatekeep anything from you. I want you to be able to understand how everything works in the game. If you do have any questions, feel free to let me know in the description or join my Discord, and I'm happy to chat there. Thank you very much for watching, and I do want to give a huge shout out to all of my members here. You too can become a member for only $1 a month, which gets you access to my videos a little bit early, as well as get you a high quality symbol in the comment section down below, and a special role in my Discord if you feel like joining there. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope your prep is ready to go for 7.3.